The next day, I drive on up to Bagnaia, an impossibly picturesque medieval town north of Rome. On a bright summer's day, the streets are flawlessly beautiful and decked with carefully tended flowers. And although it's tempting to spend the day mooching about, I am visiting for a specific reason. I'm here in Bagnaia for my next garden. Not just because it is exquisitely beautiful and worth the trip to Italy just to see this alone, but also because, for me, this is the perfect Renaissance garden. During the Italian Renaissance, a beautiful country villa was not just a retreat, but also a potent expression of status. And like Villa d'Este, this garden was created by an ambitious cardinal, Cardinal Gambara, who was granted the villa in 1560 by Pope Pius V. Gambara then commissioned one of the great architects of the 16th century, Giacomo Vignola, to redesign his summer retreat. Nowadays, we often rather glibly refer to a Renaissance man, but Vignola was the real thing and could just as readily carve a marble statue as draw up the plans for a building or a garden. As you come in, you're met with the very dramatic Fountain of Pegasus. And this sets the tone for the whole of the garden. You've got massive use of stonework, really playful, inventive handling of water. It's set in a woodland background. And there's one other crucial thing that runs right through the rest of the garden. And that's the classical allegory. Pegasus, the winged horse, comes down to the ground. And where its hoof touches the rock, there is a spark of creativity. Heading up the hill, you go through a wooded parkland where the public can stroll and play. This is the Bosco, an area that represents wild nature, albeit still carefully controlled. Many scholars believe that the Bosco was a direct influence and predecessor of the English landscape movement 200 years later. From the Fountain of Pegasus, the path takes you up through the wood to the top of the garden, and it's important to see the garden from the top working down. It's a journey. The combination of a classical building, a loggia, with its columns and woodland is not so strange if you consider the Renaissance mind, where it absorbs the wild natural world into philosophy and art and design and literature, and feels that it can control it, it can rationalize it into something safe and beautiful. Whereas if you think of Britain at that time, right about the time that Shakespeare was writing Midsummer Night's Dream, the wood is dangerous and magical and potentially really scary. But here, you go from woodland and using classical imagery and make a garden. Fantastic. This is the Fountain of the Deluge, and it refers both to rain, which is the source of all water, and also the flood in the Bible. And the water itself just looks stunning. The design is organised along a central axis, which is emphasised by the fountains and watercourses arranged in perfect symmetry, and the garden only has one route down: follow the water. Flowing down the middle of a flight of steps is the water chain, a cascade that runs down in a series of swirling stone arabesques, before it tumbles out over a massive carved head of a crayfish, the emblem of Cardinal Gambara. The water then pours into the large basin of the Fountain of Giants, where two huge stone figures recline, representing the two great rivers of the Tiber and the Arno, which in turn symbolise the friendship between the papacy in Rome and the Medici family in Florence. And this is a symbolic reference that any educated Renaissance visitor would have immediately spotted. The water then continues, amazingly, down the centre of this huge stone table, which is over 50 feet long and designed specifically for al fresco entertainment. This dining table is the most fantastic object here in the whole garden. Over 50 foot long, could have had hundreds of guests here of the cardinal. And in the middle of it is this canal. And it's icy cold. Now this is a hot July afternoon here. It's a really warm day and yet it's cool water, and the wine could be kept cool in there. Dishes would float and keep cool on the water. And at the feet is another canal running, and that would give the air coolness and moisture, and you could nibble your toes in there if you so wished.
Finally, the garden arrives at this. From the wildness of the wood, we have complete formality. Man is finally in control of nature.
Vignola created an untroubled transition from the informality of the bosco to the perfect geometry of the formal parterre, which consists of 16 squares of clipped box and yew with coloured gravel, centred around the final large fountain, the Fountain of the Moors, which is in the middle of a large square pool. This parterre might seem like many others that can be seen attached to grand buildings across Europe, but in fact it is amongst the first ever made, and is the balanced, harmonious culmination of the garden, with the town butting up to the wall at its edge, ready to receive the water now that the garden has finished with it. Villa Lante is a masterpiece, setting the tone for almost all that has followed in northern European gardens, right up to the present day.